You're fired. Amy Walker wiped down the counter for the 0.33 time in 10 minutes, her eyes flicking to the clock. It changed into nearly remaining time at Joe's Diner, a small roadside eating place in which she had worked for the past years. The night time had been gradual, which intended fewer customers or even fewer hints. Some aspect she couldn't have sufficient money proper now. Lease modified into due next week, and she or he slightly had enough keep to cowlet. The bell above the door jingled. Amy glanced up to appearance a tall, skinny man hesitating at the doorway. His clothes have been worn, his boots scuffed with dirt, and his hair disheveled. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, however exhaustion weighed on his face like a person who had spent years carrying a burden too heavy to undergo. He advanced cautiously, preventing on the counter earlier than pulling some crumpled bills from his pocket. "Excuse me, pass over," he said. His voice hard, however well-mannered. "What can I get for $5? Amy glanced at the menu board. The cheapest meal became at least $8. She knew $5 might not get him an exquisite deal, however some issue in his worn-out eyes made her selection clean. "You're in success," she said, supplying a warm smile. "We've had been given a completely unique this nighttime time. One entire meal for $5. His eyes flickered with marvel as even though he wasn't used to kindness. "In reality, honestly," Amy stated, already setting the order in advance, then he can also moreover want to argue. A couple of minutes later, she set a steaming plate of food within the front of him. He stared at it, then at her. "You probably did now not want to try this," he murmured. Amy shrugged. Anybody merits a heat meal. For a brief 2D, a smile tugged on the corners of his lips. He picked up his fork, but earlier than he may need to take a chunk, a pointy voice reduced through the diner. "Amy!" Rick, the diner's manager, strode closer to her, his expression a combination of annoyance and suspicion. "What do you agree with you studied you are doing?" he snapped, his eyes narrowing on the plate of meals. Amy's stomach tightened. "I paid for it myself," she stated flippantly. Rick scoffed. "We are no longer a charity. If you want to feed bums, do it someplace else." Amy's palms clenched into fists. "He is a veteran." Rick rolled his eyes. "Not my problem." Then, to everybody's surprise, he grabbed the plate off the counter and tossed it into the trash. The diner fell silent. Amy's breath caught as she watched the food slide into the rubbish. The veteran sat, although, his fingers resting on his lap, his face unreadable. Rick dusted off his fingers as even though he had actually taken care of something dirty. "Now, get back to artwork." Amy's blood boiled. "You are a disgrace," she stated through gritted enamel. Rick smirked. "And you're unemployed." For a moment, she had misheard him. However, then she noticed the way he stood, arms crossed, smirk widening. "You're firing me?" she requested. Rick nodded. "It's far proper. Capture your things and get out." Amy checked the room, hoping for each person to speak up. The opposite employees saved their heads down, too afraid to get concerned. The few ultimate customers sat frozen, whispering amongst themselves, however, saying now not something out loud. The veteran slowly stood, his gaze locked on Rick's. "You possibly did now not need to do this," he stated quietly. Rick snorted. "I do no longer owe you something, vintage man." The veteran did not cringe. He nodded as soon as, then turned to Amy. "Thanks in your kindness," he said. Amy pressured a small smile despite the fact that her belly twisted with tension. "I could have completed extra." "You already did greater than maximum," he responded before walking closer to the door. Amy became all over again to Rick. "You'll regret this." Rick let out a dry laugh. "Doubt it." Amy grabbed her coat and stepped into the cold night, her mind spinning with uncertainty. She had no interest, no backup plan, no concept what she changed into going to do subsequent. What she did now not apprehend, what none of them knew, became that interior 24 hours, the whole thing can also exchange. Amy walked domestic, her breath visible in the cold night-time air. The burden of what had without a doubt happened pressed carefully on her chest. She had misplaced her hobby now not due to the truth she had performed a few component wrong but because of the reality she had executed some detail right. It felt unfair. It turned out to be unfair. She reached her tiny condo, slightly greater than a room with a mattress and a small kitchenette. She tossed her coat over the chair and collapsed onto the mattress. The stack of unpaid payments at the desk caught her eye. Lease changed into due in step with week, and now she had no way to pay it. Amy slightly slept that night time. She saved. Replaying the immediate in her head. Rick's smirk, the manner he tossed the meals into the trash, the quiet dignity at the veteran's face as he walked away. The injustice of it burned in her. By way of mourning, she had no choice however to move technique looking. She pulled on her warmest coat and stepped out of doors. She spent hours preventing with the useful resource of nearby businesses, filling out programs. However, each verbal exchange ended the identical way. We are now not hiring proper now. Through noon, she located herself close to Joe's diner once more. She had no reason to head indoors, but some element made her linger at some point of the street. The place seemed the same as if not anything had passed off. Then, a deep rumbling noise stuffed the air. She had become toward the sound. A Navy convoy, jeeps, armored automobiles, rolled down the principal road. The metropolis rarely observed a few element like this. Humans stepped out of shops, staring as the street of motors slowed, then stopped proper in front of Joe's diner. Amy's stomach twisted. In the diner, Rick had been going about his day as normal. He had no regrets about firing Amy. If a few component, he felt relieved. Personnel had been replaceable. The bell above the door jingled, and Rick grew to become looking for every different purchaser. Rather, a tall man in adorned military uniform stepped interior. His presence commanded immediately hobby. A dozen Marines marched in behind him, their combat boots setting the ground with an unshakable presence. The complete diner fell right into a taken-aback silence. Rick blinked. "Can I help you?" The official's sharp eyes take a look at the diner. "We're seeking out Amy Walker." The room went silent. Rick hesitated. She could now not work here anymore. The officer's expression did now not alternate. "We comprehend. Before we should ask some component else." The door opened to vehicles yet again. Frank stepped internal. However, this wasn't the equal guy from the nighttime before these days. He stood in whole marine dress uniform, ribbons and medals properly displayed. Rick's jaw tightened. Frank failed to well know him. Instead, he became to the officer beside him. "That is Colonel James Carter," he stated, his voice every day. "And those guys, they may be my brothers." Rick swallowed. "I do not apprehend." Frank let loose a gradual breath. "The day gone by, a greater younger woman showed me kindness while no personnel sought to. And for that, she out of area her approach." The colonel took a soar ahead. "Frank Mitchell isn't always absolutely any veteran. He's a adorned warfare hero. He stored dozens of Marines in combat, and the way he modified into handled proper here is unacceptable." Rick's arms clenched. "I pay attention. I failed to recognize." "You did not care," Frank interrupted. The tension within the room thickened. Then, Colonel Carter became towards the window and locked eyes with Amy, who become though popularity outdoor. "Amy Walker," he called out. Amy iced up. Every head turned to her. For a second, she'd taken into consideration on foot away, however some element in the colonel's voice, constant enterprise however no longer unkind, made her toes move ahead as an opportunity. She stepped within the diner, the warmth of the room doing little to calm her nerves. Rick looked at her, his face dwindled. The colonel smiled slightly. "Miss Walker, we heard about what came about the day past. Greater importantly, we heard approximately what you did for Frank." Amy glanced at Frank, who gave her a small nod. The colonel endured. "We want humans together with you. Folks that do the proper problem even though there may be no reward. We would want to provide you a project." Amy's breath caught. "A task." "Not within the Army," he clarified. "We run an application that allows veterans transition once more into civilian existence. We want compassionate people to assist in counseling, pastime placement, and community help. You'll be supporting humans like Frank get over again on their toes." Amy's mind reel. Simply the day before today, she had misplaced the whole lot, and now the U.S. Marine Corps became providing her a gadget. Rick scoffed. "You cannot be excessive. She's best a waitress." Colonel Carter have end up his gaze bloodless. But, she did more for genuinely one in every of our men in an unmarried night than you probably did for your entire life." Silence. Amy checked out the card in her hand. Coronary heart pounding. A lot much less than 24 hours in the past. She had misplaced the whole thing. Now, she had certainly been given an opportunity that could alternate her life all the time. Amy stood frozen in the middle of the diner, Colonel Carter's commercial enterprise card regardless of the truth that pressed amongst her hands. The weight of the instantaneous settled over her because the complete room remained silent. She had spent the very last 24 hours questioning how she might circulate ahead, but now the solution ended up standing right inside the front of her, sporting marine uniforms, offering her an possibility she in no manner might also need to have anticipated. Rick let out a dry, humorless snort, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. You can't simply walk in proper right here and provide her a manner. She's now not qualified for something it is you are imparting. Colonel Carter slightly spared him a glance. On the other, Mr. Hudson, she is extra certified than you will ever apprehend. He became lower back to Amy, his expression softer now. We are not imparting this as charity, Miss Walker. We want human beings consisting of you, humans with coronary heart, integrity, and the braveness to do what's right despite the fact that it is tough. Amy swallowed hard. The terms hit deep. She had commonly believed in doing the proper element, but it had by no means led to an lousy lot. If anything, it had charged her more than it had ever given decrease returned. And however, those men, powerful, decent, disciplined, had been reputation proper here pronouncing that it mattered. That she mattered. Frank leaped forward, his presence every day and grounding. Amy, these men are the motive I'm in spite of the truth that status right here these days. I served with them. I bled with them. And yesterday, for the number one time in years, someone confirmed me the equal loyalty I as quickly as gave to them. His gaze became unwavering. You didn't definitely buy me a meal. You jogged my memory that human beings however care. Rick scoffed. Oh, offer me a damage. Frank's jaw tightened. However, it modified into Colonel Carter, who replied. You discover this humorous, Mr. Hudson? His tone ended up calm, but there has been something risky under it. A few issue that made Rick's smugness falter. You tossed away a fantastic worker due to the reality she confirmed compassion to a man who served his USA of the US. And now, the very equal guy is fame right here in complete uniform, collectively together with his brothers at his side. Inform me, does that also appear funny to you? Rick's mouth opened, however no phrases came out. The colonel took a slow leap ahead, his presence overwhelming. Allow me make a few component very easy, he said. His voice dropping to a close to whisper, however commanding enough that everybody within the diner should concentrate. Frank Mitchell is greater than a veteran. He's a adorned conflict hero. He stored lives. He sacrificed more than you could ever comprehend. And in preference to honoring him, you humiliated him. His eyes flickered to Amy. And in location of recognizing loyalty for your very own worker, you threw her out. A murmur rippled via the diner. A number of the customers who had remained silent in advance then now whispered amongst themselves. Some even shook their heads at Rick in quiet disapproval. Rick shifted uncomfortably. I did no longer recognize. You probably did now not care, Frank corrected. And this is worse. The tension inside the room thickened, and for the number one time, Rick seemed genuinely unsettled. Amy in the end determined her voice. I do no longer want an apology, she said, her gaze unwavering. Because of the reality is, I do now not regret what I did. If I needed to do it over again, I ought to. And if because of this that I do not belong right here, then so be it. Colonel Carter studied her for a second, then nodded approvingly. It in reality is precisely why we need you on our group. Amy regarded down at the cardboard in her hand, her arms tightening around it. The past 24 hours were a whirlwind of feelings. Worry, anger, hopelessness. However now, for the primary time for the reason that she misplaced her interest, she felt something unique. Preference. In that can I be working? She requested. A hint of a smile touched the colonel's lips. We've got a application that facilitates veterans' transition decrease returned into civilian lifestyles. It is a non-profit, however it is supported through the Army. We offer housing, mission training, counseling, topics that men like Frank need to get again on their foot, and we want people such as you to help run it. Amy's breath hitched. She had spent her life scraping through, going for walks, lifeless prevent jobs just to live to tell the tale. And now, they were offering her some detail greater, A few component tremendous. She glanced at Frank, who gave her a know-how nod. You do no longer have to decide right now, Colonel Carter stated. Take into account it. In case you're involved, come see us the next day morning. Amy took a deep breath, her coronary heart pounding. Then, with a new determined reality, she nodded. I'm in. With that, the colonel grew to be on his heel and walked in the direction of the exit, his guys following in the back of. Frank lingered for a second, his gaze assembly Amy's one closing time. You deserve greater than what this place gave you, he said. Then he too walked out. The instant they were long past, the silence inside the diner had become almost suffocating. Rick exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. Well, that turned out to be dramatic. Amy grew to turn out to be to him. Her expression unreadable. You should feel embarrassment about yourself. Rick scoffed. Oh, please. You suspect this modification something? You position the ones men are going to make your life exquisite. He gestured closer to the door. They will overlook about you in every week. Human beings constantly do. Amy didn't respond right away. Rather, she smiled. However, it wasn't the same smile she had worn for customers. This one changed into super. No, she stated softly. They won't. Without every other phrase, she evened up and walked out of the diner, stepping into the crisp midnight air. She regarded down at the business card once more, her coronary heart pounding in her chest. For the primary time in years, she felt like her life changed into approximately to exchange. And for as soon as it changed into for the better. Amy stood outdoor this diner, the bloodless wind biting against her pores and skin as she stared down on the organization card in her hand. The beyond 24 hours had felt surreal. She had lengthy beyond from being fired and humiliated to having a hard and fast of surprisingly decorated Marines step into that very diner and offer her a future she had in no manner imagined. Her coronary heart pounded as she idea about the opportunity in advance than her. Modified into this actual? May additionally moreover want she without a doubt walk far from the whole thing she had mentioned and step into something simply precise? She took a deep breath, tightening her grip on the cardboard. The selection weighed heavily on her mind, however deep down, she already knew what she had to do. There was no future for her at Joe's diner. Rick had made that smooth. And the manner the one's Marines had stood with the useful resource of Frank, stood by way of the usage of her, had awakened something in her she hadn't felt in a long time. A joy of purpose. The following morning, Amy arrived at the fireplace, the address posted on the cardboard. It led her to a large brick building surely out of doors of Metropolis, a facility she had by no means observed in advance than. The car parking zone changed into filled with motors and Navy vehicles. She took a deep breath earlier than stepping inside. The lobby modified into bright and present day, with massive domestic home windows letting within the morning's light. A receptionist appeared up from in the back of the desk and smiled. You have to be Amy Walker. Amy nodded hesitantly. Nice. They will be watching for you, the girl stated, gesturing in the direction of a hallway. Flow right in. Amy swallowed her nerves and walked down the hall, wherein she discovered Colonel Carter looking for her in a huge office. He stood from his chair as she entered, providing an enterprise handshake. Happy you made a decision to come back lower back. She once more the handshake, despite the fact that her grip wasn't almost as regular as his. I figured I owed it to myself to at the least pay attention you out. He motioned for her to sit down. Nicely, due to the fact I assume that is precisely where you need to be. As Amy settled into the chair, she glanced throughout the place of work. Body photos lined the partitions. Pictures of Marines, some in uniform, some in civilian garb, all smiling. There were commendations, medals, and awards. But what caught her attention the most changed right into a clean handwritten sign up the table. No individual left within the returned of. Colonel Carter observed her gaze. It's Miles our venture right here, she said. We address our very own, and no longer virtually those although in uniform. All of them. Even those the rest of the sector seems to have forgotten. Amy belief of Frank. How he had walked into that diner with no longer something but a few crumpled bills and the burden of his past on his shoulders. She had in no manner concept a good deal approximately what befell to veterans after they once more domestic. However now she couldn't stop thinking about it. What exactly might likely I be doing? She asked. Carter leaned forward. Our software allows veterans transition once more into civilian lifestyles. A few want jobs. A few want housing. Some honestly need someone to remind them that they rely. We work with neighborhood corporations, government agencies, and volunteers to make sure no individual falls through the cracks. Your feature might be to assist with outreach, help in interest placement, and most importantly, be a face of compassion for the ones women and men. Amy hesitated. I don't have any. Revel in this form of work. You've got the most critical kind of revel in, Carter said. You cared. And every so often that's all it takes. Amy exhaled slowly. And Frank. He is already signed on whilst playing in my Indiana, Carter said with a small smile. He is going to be operating right here too. Seems he's were given masses to offer. Clearly needed someone to remind him of that. A heat spread through Amy's chest. The idea of walking alongside Frank, of assisting people like him, all at once did not revel in so foreign places. In reality, it felt similar to the most herbal aspect within the international. She nodded, more to herself than to Carter. Suitable enough, she stated in the long run. I'll do it. The Colonel Grinnell's. The welcome to the group. Over the subsequent few weeks, Amy threw herself into the method. She learned speedy a way to navigate place of business artwork, the manner to coordinate with groups, the way to pay interest. She met veterans from all walks of existence, a few who had virtually lower back from issuer, others who've been suffering for decades. Each of them had a tale. Each of them had a conflict they had been notwithstanding the reality that preventing. And for the primary time, Amy felt like she ended up developing an actual distinction. One afternoon, as she changed into organizing a pastime truthful, she felt a faucet on her shoulder. She have ended up to find out Frank Fame there, looking sharper than she had ever visible him. He wore a neatly pressed polo shirt with the Enterprise Corporation's emblem on the chest, his hair trimmed, his posture sturdy. Hiya, he stated. Hiya yourself, Amy spoke back, smiling. How's it going? Frank exhaled, searching round on the busy room. It's far unusual, he admitted. For years, I concept my existence have become over. That no individual cared. And then you definitely came alongside. He met her gaze. You changed the whole lot. Amy's throat tightened. I simply did what everybody must do. Possibly, Frank stated. However you've got were given been the handiest one which did it. Amy did no longer understand the way to respond to that. Rather, she in fact reached out and squeezed his hand. That night time, as she locked up the place of business, she stepped out of doors and checked out the horizon. The sky became painted in deep oranges and purples, the final rays of daytime stretching for the duration of the metropolis she had as quickly as idea of as now not something more than a preventing factor in her life. Now, it felt like something greater. A 2D chance, a cutting edge starting. She pulled her cell phone from her pocket and scrolled to Colonel Carter's touch. After a 2D, she typed a message, "Thanks for believing in me." A response came almost right away. "We do no longer depart suitable people inside the again of." Amy smiled, slipping her cell phone lower back into her pocket. She had spent years questioning she end up truly a few other face inside the crowd. Only some different struggling worker looking to get by way of the use of. Now she end up a part of a few component large. And for the number one time in a long term, she felt like she clearly belonged. Amy sat in her administrative center, watching the stack of papers on her desk. It had been 6 months because of the fact she had taken the undertaking on the Veteran Transition Center, and each day at the grounds which have been a whirlwind. The work changed into tough, now and again overwhelming. However, it grew to be additionally the maximum appealing element she had ever executed. She had lengthy long passed from serving food at a diner to helping humans rebuild their lives. Outside, the hallways buzzed with interest. Veterans came and went, a few meeting with activity counselors, others attending treatment periods, and some honestly preventing through for a cup of coffee and a conversation. Amy had speedy learned that for lots of them, just having a person to listen have become as critical as any challenge placement or housing help. A knock on the door pulled her from her mind. She seemed up to see Frank's status there, hands in his pockets, acquainted however more assured appearance on his face. "Have been given a minute?" he asked. Amy smiled and gestured to the chair in some unspecified time in the future of from her. "For you, constantly." Frank stepped internal and sat down, his gaze considerate. "Tomorrow's the huge day," he said. Amy nodded. "Tomorrow have end up the middle's first dependable community occasion and open house. presupposed to connect veterans with employers, help businesses, and the network. It became her task, and she had poured her coronary heart into it. "The whole thing's prepared," she stated. "At least, I expect it is." Frank chuckled. "You'll do first rate." She studied him for a moment. His transformation during the last months were super. Even as she first met him, he had been misplaced, just trying to live. On each different day. Now, he became going for walks at the center, mentoring younger veterans, or perhaps principal an outreach application for the ones however suffering. "I'm glad with you, Frank," she said. His smile modified into small but genuine. "I should not be right here if it were not for you." Amy shook her head. "No, you will now not be proper right here if it had been not for you. You really needed a person to remind you of what you have been capable of." Frank nodded, a flicker of emotion crossing his face. "It is going every methods, you understand. You helped me, however this area helped you too." Amy knew he become proper. She had began this process questioning she emerge as really assisting others, but in truth, it had saved her too. She had spent such a whole lot of years slightly getting through, believing she had no actual reason. Now, she woke up each morning expertise she modified into growing a distinction. A silence stretched amongst them, comfortable and know-how. Then, Frank stood. "See you the next day," he stated, heading for the door. Amy watched him skip, then exhaled. Day after today became important. No longer most effective for the middle but for each veteran who would likely stroll through those doorways, looking for a state-of-the-art starting. The next day, Amy arrived early. The center had been converted. Banners hung from the walls, booths have been set up with undertaking recruiters and guide groups, and volunteers bustled about, starting up refreshments and organizing office work. Through midday, the primary veterans started out arriving. Amy watched as they bypassed from desk to table, speak me with employers, connecting with resources. Some were hesitant, uncertain. However, this is why she became proper right here. She moved through the group, greeting humans, answering questions. She observed Frank laughing with a group of greater youthful veterans, sharing recollections. She spotted Colonel Carter talking with a central authority professional, possibly running on increasing the center's funding. Then, she located a person familiar at the doorway. A man stood simply out of doors, hesitating, his arms stuffed into the pockets of his worn jacket. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, as although he wasn't nice if he have to step internal. Amy knew that look. She walked over and smiled warmly. "First time right here?" The man glanced at her, then at the bustling room behind her. "Oh yeah," he admitted. "I wasn't effective if this vicinity turned out to be for me." Amy nodded. "I get that. However, permit you to recognize a few component. Anybody in there has felt the identical manner in some unspecified time within the future. And every single taken into consideration, one of them is happy they stroll via that door." The person hesitated a second longer, then exhaled and stepped indoors. Amy watched as a volunteer greeted him, guiding him within the route of one of the cubicles. An experience of quiet satisfaction stuffed her chest. This changed into why she changed into right here. Later that night time, as the occasion wound down, Amy determined herself standing outside, looking up at the darkening sky. Frank walked up beside her. "Not terrible, huh?" She let out a clean snicker. "Not awful the least bit." Frank nodded closer to the building. "You possibly did that, you understand. You built some component actual proper here, Amy." Amy shook her head. "We built something actual." Frank smiled, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded napkin. He surpassed it to her. Amy raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Some aspect I held on to for a long term," Frank said. She unfolded out it, and her breath caught. It emerged as the receipt from the meal she had bought him that night time at the diner. Amy appeared up at Joe, and her throat tight. "I saved it as a reminder," Frank stated. "That night time, I emerge as invisible. And then you in reality definitely came along and display me incorrect." Amy swallowed tough. "Frank," he smiled, clapping her on the shoulder earlier than strolling lower once more interior. Amy seemed down on the worn piece of paper in her hand, an unmarried tear slipping down her cheek. That one meal had modified the whole thing. And now, she have become going to keep converting lives, one character at a time. In modern-day speedy-paced worldwide, Whilst Pole Landabomb kindness regularly looks like a forgotten extraordinary feature, human beings are so stuck up in their very own struggles that they now and again forget about how massive a small act of generosity can mean to a person else. Amy's tale reminds us that doing the proper factor isn't always clean, and it now and again comes at a fee, but in the end, kindness usually unearths its manner lower back. Quite a few of us have faced moments in which we needed to select among status up for what is right or looking the opportunity manner. Possibly it became protective a person who've emerged as treated unfairly, supporting a neighbor in want, or truly imparting a type phrase to a stranger. In an international that frequently rewards selfishness, being compassionate can sense like swimming in competition to the tide. However, as we observed in Amy's case, one smooth meal modified the entirety. Now not fine for the veteran she helped but for her private life as well. This tale is an effective reminder that our moves depend quantity, even when no man or woman seems to be aware at first. The kindness we showed nowadays might be the turning element in someone else's life tomorrow. If everybody took a second to look out for those around us, the arena could be a far higher location. Do you take delivery of as authentic within the strength of kindness? In that case, hit 1 in the feedback. And if you need more splendid testimonies that display humanity in spite of the truth that has choice, subscribe now. Allows make kindness skip viral. Enroll in QH Notable Memories, in which actual life heroes show that doing correct is never useless. Because of the reality, kindness isn't always only a choice. It is what makes us surely human.